You're watching the second episode of the Critical Talks podcast. And today we talk about the FDA's case for quality initiative beyond just being compliant. A very interesting topic. It's a topic that's very close to me. And today we're joined by George Zack. Hi, George. How are you doing?
Doing well. Thanks for having me, Gator.
Great. It's great to have you on the show. So George is a principal and co-founder at Two Harbors Consulting, just out of Broomfield, Colorado, a firm focused in on helping organizations achieve greater business value and performance results above compliance and regulatory expectations. His efforts include helping medical device manufacturers connect with FDA in the case for quality's voluntary improvement program. So that's the one that we'll talk about the most today. Very excited to get there. So his experience also includes in process and continuous improvement, as well as value stream mapping engagements, agile, and other software development lifecycle transformations, Six Sigma, and enterprise tool implementations. Looks like you have a great profile, great background. Would you tell us a little more about your background, and then we'll get to the case for quality, the meat of it.
Well, I think my story is probably similar to many process consultants or coaches that are out there. After a couple of decades in the corporate world, had the opportunity to jump into doing my own thing. I have the benefit of working with three partners that I had worked with in the corporate world. They were not only people that I trusted from a technical skill set perspective, but I'm really blessed that I also get to trust them from a character perspective. We've been doing this Two Harbors Consulting thing we're coming up on our 5th birthday. So it's been really exciting and educational, and looking forward to continuing to do all sorts of work. I know we're going to talk today about the case for quality and our work with medical devices, but I came from a pharma background and a software background. Mm-hmm. But in doing this consulting work, we've increased our footprint and have found that a lot of the things that we do in the regulatory and the quality space with medical devices and process improvement has application in a whole bunch of different markets. So we work with defense subcontractors. We're engaged with a public school system in the Midwest. So the lessons I think that you learn from quality and medical device have application in all sorts of different markets.
Oh, wow. That's interesting. And to your point, yeah, so quality, I've been in quality for most of my life, most of my adult life. And, a lot of people think of quality as something that only pertains to, manufacturing. You imagine those little guys, inspecting stuff coming off the line. That's really the nitty and gritty of the technical quality. It's not even the technical quality part, but quality is so much more than that. So it's great that you've been involved in all these different engagement, these different things. So when it comes to the case for quality, I stumbled upon it just about a year ago. And, I've been in the med device industry for about 5 years now. I was in automotive and different, more general, manufacturing industries. And when I started in med device, I was kind of, blown away by the amount of effort companies dedicate to, being compliant, right? So the mm-hmm. compliance part, it's very important. We all get it, compliance, but a lot of times I feel like that companies, med device companies, while trying so hard to become or to be compliant or stay compliant, they kind of lose sight of the quality side of things. So being compliant doesn't necessarily mean, you have a quality process or quality processes or quality product in place. But the other way around, the way I see it, at least, once you establish quality in general, chances are you're also compliant. So what I find is companies have really focused on being compliant and not so much on the quality side of things, on making necessarily high quality products. And I think that has to do with the fact that, you know, this is a regulated industry. Some of the stuff that these companies make go into people, save people. They're literally life-saving devices. Some of them are implants, right? So it's more of a, well, you better be compliant, unless otherwise you could be looking at some trouble from the government, essentially, right? Um, so back to compliance. So when you started consulting, for the FDA's case for quality, like what was your perception going into it, and what's your perception now? Like, did it change in any way, having worked with all these companies?
Sure. So I think your insight about companies being compliant, but maybe struggling with delivering quality products, and vice versa, companies that are delivering quality products, but not necessarily being compliant, really was the seed that planted the tree for the case for quality. There's a pretty famous video out there, at least I think it's famous, with the director of CDRH,
Hmm.
Dr. Jeffrey Shuren, where he speaks to this very thing. He was seeing that there were sites that were coming up with official action indicated time and time again, and those were not necessarily being addressed in an appropriate way. And he speaks to how they were playing a game of whack-a-mole with some of these
Hmm.
organizations. Um, and with that, I think this goes back to 2012, 2013. I'd have to check the exact dates. He really wanted to initiate this case for quality to help understand what does it take to get organizations to move above and beyond compliance.
Hmm.
And it's almost a quote here. He says in that video, he says, it's not to say that compliance is not important, because it certainly is important, but it's not enough. And then I think as you dig into it, you start to recognize, obviously, that quality is not just, as you mentioned, it's not just an attribute of manufacturing. You start to see it everywhere, and you start to see the difference between compliance and quality everywhere. Those people that have heard me speak, I've used this example countless times. But it works. I think I had an epiphany when I had my teenage son. He's no longer a teenager now, but when he got his driver's license, we all remember that day that we go for your driver's test, and it's very much this entire activity of compliance, right? You get into the car, you make sure I don't think they put hands at 10-2 on the wheel anymore because of airbags. That's a different thing. But you put your hands on the wheel in the right place. You make sure you touch the mirror to make sure, like, you're pretending like you're actually adjusting the mirror. You go through all these activities to demonstrate to whoever's proctoring that exam, your driver's exam, that you are compliant. Now, I don't think any of us looking back, if you got your driver's license when you were 16, would say, yeah, I was a high quality driver on that day. Now, my son, when he got his driver's license, he was pretty convinced he was a high quality driver. I had a very different perspective as to what it takes to be a high quality driver. And you can start to use that as an analogy, like, hey, you may not be in compliance. You don't wear your seatbelt. You're not necessarily in compliance, right? But you may still be driving at a high quality in terms of your performance on the road. Or you might be completely compliant and you still may be a low quality driver. You can start to see how those things overlap with each other. So in the case for quality, there are multiple initiatives that the FDA has partnered in a private-public partnership with the Medical Device Innovation Consortium. There's a whole handful of initiatives. One's called Make CAPA Cool. There's another related to making quality as a career, where people are trying to work to make a minor education program at many universities so that quality is actually something that's part of college education. The one that I have been most involved in it's got a couple different names. It's been called the Medical Device Discovery Appraisal Program,
Hmm.
and it's also been called the Voluntary Improvement Program. And in this, we are leveraging a maturity model, specifically the capability maturity model integrated. That's a process improvement model, a performance improvement model that's been around in excess of 20 years and used in a variety of markets. There's a whole history to that. But we essentially work with organizations, execute a CMMI appraisal to help identify improvement opportunities for them. And by way of their participation in that, they then receive some modifications to existing regulation to, as an example, they are removed from the routine inspection list. They still may have a for-cause inspection, but they're removed from the routine inspection list. Their 30-day change notices would be executed in a accelerated fashion, things like that. But what's really exciting about that, that's kind of the nuts and bolts of the program, is we get to work with organizations that have already demonstrated a high degree of historical compliance, and then work with them to identify where they can really improve their performance and hopefully ultimately also improve the quality of the products and services that they're in business for to help their patients.
Okay, so you're essentially, so it's a voluntary program, right? So
Yep.
it's kind of a privilege to be a part of this. Like, do you?
Yeah.
Do you?
Yeah. So an organization, a medical device organization that's established, that is established in the U.S. that has, well, they don't have to be in the U.S., but they're distributing product in the U.S., I should say, because that's why the FDA would care about them.
Yeah.
If they have a good compliance history, they can apply to be in the program. Once they're then cleared, so that's a voluntary enrollment. Once they're cleared into the program by the FDA, then we go ahead and execute one of those particular appraisals and provide that feedback back to them.
Oh, great. Okay, so how many appraisals have you done with your clients?
Well, I have, gosh, my personal account, in that program, I'd have to go back and check. I'd have to say it's probably, somewhere on the order. The voluntary improvement program has been a pilot for 3 years. We suspect in 2021 it will become a full-blown program by way of the FDA announcing that. They recently put out their expected list of draft guidances for 2021, and the announcement of that was on their A list for 2021. Hopefully we'll see that come out. I think there's been close to 150 appraisals done in the pilot in total. Those numbers are changing every week because I can tell you there's appraisals that are even occurring at the time that we're recording this. Many sites have undergone multiple appraisals in the program. I think personally, within that program, I've probably been on 24, maybe as many as 30 appraisals. I'd have to go back and execute a count on it. But it's been with a variety of companies, small medical device manufacturers, organizations that are less than 40 people, all the way up to the tens of thousands of employees, types of organizations. Maybe many of the names that people are familiar with in the medical device space.
Sure. All right. So you've seen a really good amount. Yeah, my question was going to be essentially around, okay, so you've seen a good amount, right? Like, do you see, like, out of these companies that you've, helped appraise, do you see like any pattern as to, which areas they need to kind of like take a closer look at in order to move from just being compliant to, to quality? I'm personally, I've in having worked in the industry, I know I have some areas in mind, but like, do you see a pattern, like regardless of size or class or other, determining, factors? Do you see any patterns that have stood out to you?
I do. Our initial appraisal with all organizations is standard. So there's for lack of a better term, there's a template. There's a set of practice areas that we execute to as the criteria for all initial appraisals. Within that, there's some areas where we see organizations do typically very well. Most of the organizations that are in the program are class 2 or class 3 medical device manufacturers, and they're compliant, and they're obviously class 3. They're dealing with products that are often going into people's bodies, and their capabilities in design, development, manufacturing typically are very strong and very impressive. everything from automated solutions to robotics. It's amazing. And
Hmm.
I really enjoy the opportunity that I get to see all that.
Yeah.
On the other end of it, and I'm not particularly surprised by that, because that's what I would expect. You are, in bringing that device to market, that's very tightly regulated. It's very tightly reviewed by the FDA, strongly considered to make sure that you're delivering those safe and effective products. On the flip side, we often see that we also bring within those practice areas, as part of the initial appraisal, we often see that the areas that are not regulated but are considered best practice within the CMMI model can lend to opportunities for improvement for these organizations. So much of the project management, there's nothing really in regulation in 820 or 1345 that you see directly about project management, or that you would see in regards to specific operational definitions related to measurements. And so a lot of organizations in their initial appraisal, when we show up with some of these concepts, while they may be demonstrating strong compliance and great capabilities even against that model, in other areas, those are typically common opportunity for improvement areas in that the project management and some of the measurement and analysis activities.
Okay, so project management. I love that. So I've seen, the same thing, especially for, you know, for developing a brand new product. So project management of that, right? I know that we have this waterfall model, right?
Mm-hmm.
For developing a med device. I'm pretty sure you know
Yep.
by heart, right? There's this whole, gathering of, user needs and so on and so forth. And then you develop the device, you verify it, you validate it. And I mean, it's a good framework, right? But in reality, anyone that's been involved in developing a new medical device or any kind of new product, it's kind of like a black box. There's a lot of going back and forth. There's a lot of iterations. And what I've seen is sometimes it's really hard to fit, the actual process, the actual development process into that box, into that linear model, right? Oh, like, okay, now we're done with verification, and then we have to move to the next, phase, so to speak. But in reality, it doesn't always work like that. Like you continuously develop a new feature, you try it out, go back, re-verify. So I've seen some major challenges with like having to apply this linear model to new product development, which a lot of times results in a lot of wasted effort, mostly around documentation. So what is that what you were referring to, or do you?
Well, that's certainly some of the challenges that some organizations have. There's the old saying, I think it was George Box that said, all models are wrong, but some are useful.
Yep.
So, a life cycle model like the one that you talk about, there's definitely some use in identifying, okay, this is the phase gate or stage gate, whatever you'd like to call it, that we're looking to go through. Certainly within software, there's been a lot of movement in the past decade or so towards agile life cycle methodologies. But even there are challenges with that particular methodology for some organizations. But I think some of the other challenges that we see include making sure that you just some of the basic stuff, making sure that you have all the right stakeholders at the table, right? Because in working through bringing a medical device or any particular product to market, you have to make sure you have your quality folks at the table. You have to make sure that you have your engineers at the table. You have to make sure that you have marketing people at the table. Hey, if that device is going to be used by physicians, you have to make sure you have them at the table. So just the appropriate inclusion of all the stakeholders at the right time. That's a lot of coordination when you consider all that. If you're building a house, that's a pretty clear set of plans as to what you have to have: plumbers and electricians and drywallers and framers. Yeah. All of that, in coordination is a pretty big effort. And obviously I would suggest with many of these medical devices, it's even more complicated. So coordinating on all of those pieces and parts at the right time. A common one that I think I see is design is often done in one particular location. and manufacturing is done in another location. And no surprise, many of us know this is often done offshore, right? And so you have great geographic distance between somebody saying, I want to build this thing over here like that, and then what's that actually going to mean when you're designing that for manufacturing in a completely different location,
Yep.
where you have to be considerate of floor space, worker space. Obviously this has even been challenged to some degree now with COVID, how some of these floor spaces have to maybe be redesigned to have people be socially distant. So all of that is at the end of the day, the agency, I don't want to say they don't care, because they certainly do care, but they're looking at the end product, right? They want to make sure that the product's safe and effective. But all these things that go in ahead of that entire life cycle that you're talking about, those are all planning. You have to estimate that work that you're going to consider. You have to plan the involvement of all those folks, and people don't, nobody works in a singular, this is the only thing that I'm doing. So they're juggling several projects. There's all that from the planning perspective, and then monitoring to that plan, and then learning back from that. So as you do additional projects in the future, so that you can be more effective. So definitely that is a place where, again, if you go and look in 820, you're not going to see project planning
Yep.
in there. I think the word design plan might appear in there once,
Yeah.
but you don't see a lot of treatment to it. And so it's often a place where people require some work. And even outside of manufacturing, right? I'm sure in your job, if you're working as a quality engineer, you have your day-to-day job, but then somebody drops on you, hey, there's this kappa that needs some work, right? Or there's this non-conformance that's come up that you also have to consider. There's this additional training. All of these things are going into the plan of your particular day, and managing that from a resource perspective is also an important consideration for many of these organizations so that they can be more effective.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Especially when it comes to, documenting stuff. I mean, we like to document everything. This is like I said, highly regulated industry, but just the fact that some of the, documenting a cap or walking through all the phases, right, can be very tedious, very time consuming. And at the end of the day, if it's not an actual solution that, resolves the issue and prevents it from happening, from recurring, you just spent a whole lot of time, signing documents to cover your bases, right? I'm not saying that's always the case, but I've seen it happen. And the one thing that I think other companies could benefit from, from this case for quality initiative. And this is the point where, like, I literally had to, like, dig up, and like search the FDA website to find this. Like, does the FDA plan on, I guess, augmenting this program with, like, the sharing of best practices, right? I'm pretty sure in appraising all these companies, a lot of good, like, best practices have been identified as to.
Sure. I would suggest that just taking the FDA for a second and just putting that piece on a shelf, by way of participating in this, there has been a community built of the industry participants. And so they have the opportunity to, in a variety of working groups and forums and other meetings, regularly collect and share information. Now, as you might expect, sometimes organizations are really willing to share what their opportunities for improvement are, what things they're doing well. Often people are more interested in sharing what they're doing well than what their opportunities for improvement are. But there's this community of, across those 150 appraisals, of the small organizations, the medium organizations, the large organizations, sharing their practices as applicable, right? Because sometimes you're talking about organizations that are in different market spaces, right? You have one that's making a catheter, you have another one that's doing sterilization or an IVD.
Yeah.
But there's definitely increasingly, as a part of the case for quality, and again, through many of the efforts by the agency and the Medical Device Innovation Consortium, there is this sharing of best practices. It is, I think, sometimes it's challenged because you have other industries like, the aviation industry might look at like what's going on in medical device and like, yeah, this is what you just need to do. But there's such variation in the medical device industry, as I said, from software as a medical device to, class 3 implantables, software as a medical device. There's such variation that sometimes those best practices, there's quite a bit of translation that needs to go from organization to organization. But certainly in regards to some of the activities that we've talked about with the CMMI model, in regards to project planning, in regards to measurement operational definitions, in regards to some of the other places where we're approaching organizations, we're definitely seeing some of that best practice sharing, and the agency is certainly is encouraging that as well.
Okay, that's good to hear. And to your point, med device is a really diverse industry, like other industries like, automotive, right? There's not that many different kinds of, cars. Of course, there's trucks, there's, SUVs, but it's all based on the same thing, right? Whereas
Yeah.
med device, you could be making rubber gloves or
True.
life-saving neurovascular devices, which are literally night and day. It's a night and day difference. So yeah, I see the challenge of applying and sharing best practices where those best practices may not even apply. Okay, great. So I'm pretty sure you have inside information, like any plans any plans on augmenting the program or changing it in any way in 2021 and the years to come?
Well, so the program is, I've been proud to say that the program has been from early days has been very clear that it wants to be a learning program and one that will look to shift based upon appropriate learnings to meet the needs of industry that's being appraised, the agency, the appraisers, ultimately the patients that receive these particular products as well. So there are all the time there are minor shifts. Just in the execution of the program, which is a really kind of a low hanging fruit example. There was at this time last year, all the appraisals were performed by going on site to those organizations and executing those appraisals. Obviously, we could have made a choice in March of 2020 to completely stop doing any of these appraisals because of COVID. But there's been shifts to perform these appraisals in a virtual sense. So the execution of these have all been virtual. We're starting to see a little bit of shifting on that, obviously, with things changing here in 2021 with the pandemic and vaccines. But initially, even doing them virtually were just for domestic sites in the program and ones that had been in the program for a couple of years. We're now seeing that we're executing these appraisals in a virtual sense across multiple time zones, even for sites that are just enrolling into the program. So we're making shifts like that. We're also making shifts based upon the large amounts of data that we've been collecting. There is discussion across industry, the agency, the CMMI Institute, which is a part of ISACA, the appraiser community, as to how to continue to turn the dials to make the program most effective for all of those participants in a year 5 of somebody going through an organization going through an appraisal. So I don't think that's like any sort of special inside information, and so much as anybody that's participating in the program is again part of that community and is engaged in helping us make those decisions. So additionally, there's exploration as to, okay, we have this set of benefits that are provided to the industry so that, we talked about 30-day change notices. Those are performed in an accelerated fashion. I think the agency has processed in excess of 300 of those change notices. And so there's conversation as to, are there additional regulatory benefits that can be provided to these organizations that are demonstrating strong compliance, involvement in this program, and continuous improvement? Is there something that we can do in the 510K space?
Oh yeah.
Obviously there's a whole bunch of, you can see that there's a whole bunch of, when you step back and you look at the things that are occurring with the agency in regards to consideration of real world evidence, real world data, digital health, the variety of things that they're trying to do in the 510K space. I think there is broader consideration of how all these things will also fit together. Certainly those things don't move at a super fast pace, but I think the agency is looking consistently within CDRH as to how can they leverage all of these things, maturity models, risk-based approaches to CAPA, so that it's better for the agency, it's better for industry. This is not in order. I think these are all equivalent, but ultimately, actually, if there's one above all of it, making sure that we get safe and effective solutions out to patients as quickly as possible.
Great. Wow. It's a wealth of information you just shared with me. So, on a different note, like I said, working with all these companies, like, can you share with us a couple, stories or experiences as far as learnings, maybe the good, maybe some aha moments, maybe some, oh, wow moments, whereas where you were surprised, both in a good or in not necessarily a good way. You don't need to you don't have to share too much information if it's confidential, but.
Well, this is the secret, I think, about being a consultant, but that it is, it's a wonderful position in that every time you go someplace, you're going to school. I really feel that every time I walk into the doors of any of these organizations, be it a medical device organization or something outside of the case for quality, as I talked about previously, I have the opportunity to learn. And what I hope to bring to the table as a coach or a consultant is the experience that I have and leveraging these models and seeing what other organizations have done. So there's some pattern recognition. I can say, oh, here's an opportunity for you to improve based upon things that I've seen at other sites. But every site I go to, I really look to treat that as a learning opportunity for me. And sometimes, I am, I'm kind of humbled and blown away at how ignorant I am on certain things. I like to make the joke that the first time there was a sterilizer I went to that did gamma sterilization, and most medical device products in the U.S., I think something on the order of 2/3 are sterilized by way of ETO sterilization, but there are some that are also sterilized by way of gamma radiation. And so when you walk into that, the concrete bunker, and you look down into the big tank of water, and you see the water glowing blue, I was like, why is the water glowing blue? Well, that's because the water is being irradiated by that, that cobalt 60 in there. So it was just kind of like, oh my gosh, gee whiz, I'm standing above this giant, yes, I'm holding a Geiger counter that's not clicking, so it's just, I know that's not like a learning in regards to process, but all of a sudden I was, thrown back to, 10th grade chemistry class in regards to some of those sort of basics. But really, in the case for quality, learning how, one of the trends that I've seen is how organizations have adopted many lean manufacturing techniques, use of tier systems to communicate goals, objectives, measures, expectations, and the use of boards, physical boards to do that. Learning how they've been navigating those through the COVID challenges. So there's much that I've learned in that particular space. That's really exciting, and it's pretty interesting because I think a lot of that probably actually came from auto manufacturing by way of Toyota. I haven't really done the archaeology to trace that all back, but it just seems like that's the natural connection. Surprising in a negative regard. I think that we talked a little bit about this before you hit record. I think that this isn't a surprise, but I think that most organizations don't necessarily have a strong handle on capacity and availability management for their staff,
Mhm.
right? And this COVID world and the virtual world and the ubiquitous nature of all the tools that we have, where you can be 4 feet away from your refrigerator or your bed, and boom, your iPad or your computer's right there.
Mhm.
People are there's not a good handle on how much people are working and how much effort's necessary to do that. And it gets back to that project management perspective. So often, I think in helping organizations, we're encountering the improvement opportunity to point out to them, like, you don't have a good handle on this, how much George is getting dragged from project to project to project, and how that context switching is impactful to your efficiency and your quality.
Okay. Yeah. And what you just said, about companies coming up with like creative ways, to do stuff, to accomplish things, to manage things, right? And that's really key. And I know that some companies still follow regulations, whether it's an ISO standard or 820 to the letter, right? And of course, sharing of best practices can be helpful, but I think each and every organization needs to figure out themselves what works best for them, right? And but you can only do that through seeing how other people, companies do things, right? Through learning that. Or you get creative and come up with your own way of doing things, but it's a mixed bag. So I'm glad that you were able to share with us this wealth of knowledge. I wish I had your amount of experience, as far as having worked with you know as many companies as you have, because
Well, when you
yeah,
do, the beard turns this color versus
I
the
know, I
darker
know.
color that you have. So
Yeah.
I think, yeah, the experience might be overrated, but thanks for the kind words.
Sure. I think that's one of the best way to learn, is to see diversity, how other people, companies, departments do things, right? Because if there's only one thing that you see and do over time, it gets repetitive, and it's kind of hard to get out of that box that you've locked yourself into. Anyway, thanks for sharing with us your experience and expertise. One more question before we wrap up here. So, do you have any trends for 2021 for med device that you see happening?
Well, it's an interesting question. I think, I just recently, we also at Two Harbors, we did a podcast on this on with John Spear from
Hmm.
Greenlight Guru, predicting as well as we could, trying to read the tea leaves as to where things were going to be potentially going. And there certainly are some obvious targets there with what's occurring in the EU, as well as with digital health. And I think if you had asked me that in January of 2020, I don't think anybody would have predicted where everything was going to go with COVID.
Hmm.
I do think that I guess I'll pick an easy one. I think we will see, and I hope this is a positive outcome of COVID, the use of increasingly of virtual techniques like this, and even potentially inspections from regulatory agencies like the FDA to do some of those activities virtually.
Virtual, right?
Recently worked with an
Yep.
organization where they've essentially we've all seen an iPad, and you've probably all seen a Segway, right? Those kind of bicycle type things that sometimes you see police officers on in airports. I've seen an organization where they basically taken a mini one of those, and they put the iPad on top of it. And so a design engineer can go around on one of those virtually through the manufacturing facility in the clean room, right? So that person is someplace else and that thing is driving through the clean room. So you can actually get as close to what that manufacturing engineer or what that line worker is doing while being wherever you are in the world. So I think that's an incredible use of technology, software, the internet, to leverage virtual techniques. And I think we'll just see more of that sort of thing occurring in all aspects of our work, not just in device, but in all aspects of our work.
I agree with you. I couldn't agree with you more. Technology is finally, infiltrating, the med device industry, from all fronts. Obviously, COVID has, role in it, but these new technologies, whether it's, these remote audits that you mentioned, or new manufacturing technologies, or AI-based product or manufacturing, equipment. I'm thrilled to see, how this pans out, for the industry in 2021 and beyond. And I'm glad to be a part of it.
Yep.
In my full-time job. So that's
excellent.
great. But on the podcast side of things, that's one of the reasons why I started podcast, because I'm really excited about what the future holds for industry in general, and also for the med device industry. And talking to folks like you who have the knowledge and who've seen it, and who can who have good ideas and good thoughts on what's coming, right? I think that's always something worth talking about. So with that said, thank you so much for sharing with us your thoughts and your expertise. Really appreciate it. That was the second episode of the podcast. I hope to talk to you soon.
Appreciate having the opportunity to chat with you.